Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Another shooting, this time in Louisville. 5 people murdered and 8 hospitalized. And again, I'm sure there are thoughts and prayers. I'm sure all that. We're going to get that again. But this time it wasn't a school. It was a bank. And according to Ted Cruz, this stuff doesn't happen because they've got guns at banks, which is, again, another one of these weird moments where it's not the gun. It's not. Also in gun news, let's talk about a little gun news. You remember the 6-year-old who took the gun to school, shot the teacher a couple months ago? Well, turns out mom's going to be arrested. And, maybe she's been indicted on recklessly leaving a firearm around and child endangerment. Felony child neglect, I guess, is the official charge, and a misdemeanor count of recklessly leaving the gun so that a 6-year-old could grab it. You know, now I'm not quite sure why they chose her. Maybe this is going to be the new way forward. We'll find out. But got to that. Also interesting bit of news in Florida, and this one kind of blew my mind. Because I'm still trying to figure out this whole the new Wild West gun culture. Evidently, 2 guys are driving down the road and they're shooting at each other. One guy yelled at the other guy. Another guy yelled back. They exchanged gestures, which in normal civil society that happens. People lose their cool. You know, I'll beat you up on the side of the road if you pull over, and people just go on their way. Eventually, your exit comes off and you go. Now, 2 idiots had guns. They ended up shooting at each other. They didn't hit each other. Now, look, if 2 idiots shoot at each other and hit each other, I'm actually okay with that. That's how you thin the herd. But both of these morons shot each other's daughters. One, a 5-year-old girl, another, a 14-year-old girl. The 5-year-old got hit in the leg. The 14-year-old got shot in the back, collapsed a lung. Well, one of them is going to go on trial for the act. The other guy, they've ruled him in self-defense. And I'm going, hold on a second. I'm confused at the new gun culture, confused at the new gun rules. I understand you got the right to stand your ground now. You don't have to retreat. You don't have to be sane and go, you know what, I'm just going to leave this situation. No, you can stand your ground with your gun. Again, I get 2 idiots with guns shoot each other. I get this. It's simple, straightforward. It fits neatly in a box. You both pulled the gun. You both consequences. You'll each figure it out. They each shot somebody else. How is it that one of the guys walks away scot-free? He shot somebody. Wasn't the guy who was going after him. Am I missing something? And look, my mind, I saw this gun story, another, multiple people who are just going to do about their daily business who aren't going home. And so I got a ton of them. And honestly, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm not going to bother because this is yet another one of these issues we're not allowed to solve. We're not allowed to have discussions. We're not allowed to, because the moneyed interests are, it's all about keeping us against each other. It's keeping us pitted against one another. And again, I go back to Rupert Murdoch, Sir Godly Rupert Murdoch, who said it's not about red or blue. It's about green. Everything we do, it's about green. The wealth class has figured out masterfully. Honestly, masterfully. I give them credit. You've got to be at awe at how well they keep us at each other's throats. Neighbors who've been neighbors 20 years at each other's throats over who they voted for in the last election. It's masterful. Because again, it's not about red or blue. It's about green. It's about robbing us blind. And the thing is you come up with issue after issue after issue. It doesn't matter. We're never allowed to find common ground. We're not. Even if we agree, there's got to be something. Because we're forced fed these binary black and white choices, these extreme options that, people don't agree. I don't agree with myself 100% of the time. I'm certainly not going to agree with somebody across the street. It's never going to happen. But we're put in this scenario where if you're not pure, if you're not in team whatever, you're against us. The Bush frame, you're with us or you're against us. And look, the right-wing media juggernaut, they know this. They understand this better than anyone. And I'll say all media, but more so the right-wing media. Boy, do they understand. Understand that the right wing gets outrage candy well. The outrage machine functions well-oiled, highly skilled, and it doesn't care. This is the great thing about right-wing media. It doesn't care if you're for or against. It just wants you on a side. You've got to pick a camp, got to go get into your silos, and then never talk to the other people. Because again, it's about green. It's not about red or blue. It's not about the issue. It's not even about the issue. It's about how much money they can grab from us, how much they can grift from us. It's about stealing your pensions. It's about taking health care from you. It's about taking education from your children. It's about destroying the American dream so that a handful can profit more. And I got into this over the weekend, and where my mind is in this, over the weekend, during a podcast that we do every Saturday, and an unfiltered podcast, if you will. FCC rules don't allow certain things to be said, so this is a little freer format. I had said that I had a problem with trans women athletes, fighting in, like, I saw an MMA fight where a trans woman just beat the tar out of this other woman, and I was like, I'm against that. I think we've got to, as a society, come up and talk about how we're going to deal with this issue. Because look, I'm with you. I'm with the trans community. Live your best life. Be happy. Be who you are. Do what you need to do to lead your best life. I'm there. But you lose me when I get to the responses I got emailed to me, which is, if I'm not all on team trans, then I'm anti. And this just drove me nuts because I'm going, that's not how things work. I'm not in favor of combat sports having trans women in combat sports. The MMA, wrestling, and it then came up over the weekend, and I didn't know this, that one of the swimmers who had competed against Leah Thomas, and all that kerfuffle that went on, had talked about her experience of being in the locker room. And I'm not in favor of that either. But I'm not on, we have to cut all this off. I'm going, how do we as a society solve this? How do we move forward that everyone's rights and everyone's happiness are met without saying you have one of two choices? You're on this team or this team. And again, it's not even about the issue anymore. And this is what's so frustrating to me. Because there are ways forward. If we were to come back to the town square and, I don't know, maybe talk to each other, maybe have a functional government of people who are willing to talk to each other. And I go back to some of the older people who I know who have served in Congress. Go back to the Reagan years. Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to get drunk together. Do you think you see that? You think McCarthy's over there with Biden? No, they're now pitted against one another because if one wins, the other has to lose. And this is the world that we're in. And it's whatever T-shirt you bought. If you bought the T-shirt, you've got to be on team T-shirt. Instead of going, you know what? Most people are like I am. Most people I talk to, like the guy I talked to at the gym today, most people are in the world of, I don't care. Doesn't affect me. I want people to be happy. I want people to lead their best lives. Doesn't matter to me. Everyone should have the right to pursue their happiness. Where I live in Pennsylvania, that's the state motto, pursue your happiness. And yet you've got legislators who are trying to figure out how to block people from that. And the majority of working class people, the people that I associate with, they're not on team either side. But when you start throwing out this extreme rhetoric, like we're not going to let people talk at a college, are you kidding me? and we're going to protest and we'll do this. Look, I'm all in favor of protest, but it doesn't make any sense. All you're doing is gaining attention for the person who feeds off of it. And you feed into a system that goes, what? We're going to send some crazy right-winger to a college and hope that all of the students put up a protest so we can make money off of, oh, look at how victimized I am? You know what would be better? Let these right-wing idiots come and spew their nonsense. And nobody showed up. Let them have their say. And if you really want to, maybe talk to the people who went. Don't mind them. Don't mind the speakers, because they're there to feed the outrage candy. Talk to your friends and neighbors. Talk to your family. Because it's amazing to me how many people that I've run into over the years and talked about these various issues just to gauge their positioning. How many people of my generation come back to, I don't really care. I don't care what you do. Just don't force me to do it. And this is where we had better, as a society, come back around to reality. Lead your best life. But if you think that everyone has to be 100% on your team, that's not happening. And that's where the outrage machine makes its money. Because it's easier to fall into, well, this is how we've always done it. And we can't make accommodations. We can't change because, hey, this is how we've always done it in every facet of life. And again, we come back to this position. And this is the most important point in this. It's never about the issue. Whether it's guns, whether it's who goes to what bathroom, whether it's transgender athletes, whether it's education or healthcare or infrastructure or anything. It's never about the issue as much as it is about garnering the outrage so that the moneyed interests can continue to profit off of us. And the sooner we come back around and say, hey, maybe we all have some interest. Maybe we have an interest of I don't know, a country that can actually solve problems. Because here's the thing, and this is where I left my guy at the gym today. He said the reality is while we're spending all of this time, energy, effort, all this division, all this divisiveness, all this hatred, all this anger, while we're doing all this, AI is going to take over the world. Automation is going to end most of us. And we haven't even thought about it, let alone talked about it. It's already, from people that I've talked to, it's already too far ahead to exist. It's already, the genie is already out of the bottle. And we haven't even talked about if the bottle exists. And we have legislators who, again, they're happy to get their 15 minutes of fame. They're happy about, hey, I can get campaign contributions out of this. But we're not talking about the real issues that really affect people's lives. These things are things that we have to figure out how to deal with. This is the era that we're in, and we're failing at it. And we're failing badly. But here's the thing, and this is where my mind was today, because I had someone call me transphobic, and I'm like, oh, if you say so, it's possible to be in favor and stand with the trans community and say, no, this is a bit too far. That's possible. And by alienating people who, like me, say that, the sports issue is kind of something, what are we doing with surgeries for 7-year-olds? Is it happening? I don't believe it is, and I've been told it's not, but it's what people believe. If you're not in favor of that, do you get lost as well? I want to know. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I like my haters, so go right to the top. If it makes you angry, I want to know about it, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Because this is one of those things we've got to figure out. If we're going to move forward as a country, if we're going to move forward together as a country, and maybe undo some of the horrible stuff, talking to each other matters. Want to hear your thoughts. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, some good news. The president and the administration heading out on the road, second week in a row on the Investing in America tour. And look, last week they were all over the place, and good for them. They were in Minnesota at the Cummings plant there. They were out in Georgia talking about solar panels, made it to New Mexico. You had people in Colorado, all over the country. You had Biden administration people talking about the investments that are happening in New Mexico, for instance. Pete Buttigieg was in Deming, I believe it was, talking about the $2.6 billion in money that's going to be going into 217 infrastructure projects there, whether it's transportation, broadband, or water projects. This is a massive investment in the state of New Mexico and going to be very helpful to folks. Portland, Maine, you had the first lady there talking about how important free community college, the experiment that they're trying in Maine, how important that is for workforce development. You had the first lady also in Vermont, doing the future of America's workforce, again providing free community college. So there was a lot of this stuff that happened. Mainstream media didn't really pick up a lot on this. And I think this is an incredibly important topic and one that everybody should be talking about. Look, this is how we're making lives better. This is what Democrats do very poorly. If this was Trump, man, there would have been, here's the thing. While he was president, everyone thinks he was doing this stuff, didn't do anything. There was a lot of infrastructure weeks. In fact, I remember it was like infrastructure week, 200 weeks in a row. Never got anything done, but cute little displays, lots of funny pictures. But this president, our guy Joe, not out there touting, patting himself, breaking his arm, patting himself on the back, actually getting the stuff done. This week, the tour is going to be going through Georgia, Kansas, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, those working class states where manufacturing has been decimated. The thing that I love, again, this idea that we're going to reshore manufacturing or bring jobs back, we're going to give people an opportunity to support families. And as I've been saying, the way forward for this country is to unite people in the workplace. I've been saying this for years. As labor unions have been under attack, we've been ripped apart. As families struggle to make ends meet, as families struggle to save for college, save for retirement, save for any number of bumps in the road, people are getting angrier. The struggle is real. And again, we've got a political system that dealing with working class issues, not on their plate. They don't care. It's about the division. It's about, hey, look at me. It's about my 6-minute shot over at the F channel. This is why I'm glad Biden's running around the country going, look at what we're doing. And look at the jobs and the lives that we're helping. Which is why I think it's interesting that, again, Joe Biden has been the most pro-union president of my lifetime. And this is another issue. I know right now someone's at their computer. I know it. And here in probably 5 minutes, I'm going to get an email going, well, he didn't do anything for the railroad workers. Yeah, he actually did. Did they get everything they wanted? No. But what would they have gotten? Well, they've got nothing out of Trump. Let's be honest. But again, it's this: you have to be 100%, or you've got to be pure, or you're nothing. But Biden has been the guy out there saying, look, the way we hold on to democracy, the way we fight for better opportunities is to unionize. Which is why when I came across this this comment by Tia Lee, who we've had on this program over, I think it's been about 3 or 4 years since she was on. She was the head of EPI for a while. She's now the Deputy Undersecretary for International Labor Affairs for the U.S. Department of Labor. During her virtual address at the Summit for Democracy in Zambia, she said, quote, unions are essential to democracy. If we believe in democracy, we need strong labor movements. And I'm going, exactly. But this has been one of the core tenets of the Biden administration. He said this back in 2021. He said, in a simple word, unions means there's a democracy. Organizing, joining a union, that's democracy in action. And what's interesting, and this is another one of these moments, and it came up with my friend at the gym today, that this never was a divisive issue. You know, everybody knew somebody who was in a union. Everyone, hey, you know, that guy makes a decent wage, got good health care. Wish we had that kind of health care. And aspired to be better, aspired to demand more. Now you say you get into these discussions with people, and they bring up the word union, and you go, well, they're just we've been told to hate each other on this, something that brought us together. This is what the GOP right-wing machine has done masterfully. They have taken what was once a strength and beaten it down so much that people use it as a weapon. And look, I'm proud of the fact that I've been in a labor union for over 30 years. I'm proud of the fact that we've fought for better wages, hours, conditions. I'm proud of the fact that I've seen people's lives, my own included, get better because of the work that we do and because of the contract that we work under. I want that for everybody. And I'm happy that we've got a guy in the White House who sees that as well. Now, what's interesting to me, and the reason I bring this up with Tia Lee, is that she's talking to people in Africa about this. She's talking to people all over the world going, democracy, if you have democracy, you have to have a strong labor movement. That is what democracy is. And we're doing the work of promoting trade unionism around the world, of giving workers the ability to do better. And as one person said it's a foreign policy for a middle class, a global middle class. And my mind started thinking about, we're not doing it here because we're so badly broken. Policy-wise, we couldn't pass major comprehensive labor law reform in this country if the sun were burning down on us. So we're doing it overseas. Kind of reminds me of, the Marshall Plan, where we couldn't get national health care, we couldn't get a social safety net, so we went around to the European countries and we got it for them. This is kind of the same thing for me. My question is will we again continue to push great ideas and good American values out to the rest of the world while at home shunning them? It's remarkable to me that, there are people who go, we don't need no stinking union, and then complain about how bad their jobs are. I wonder if there's a connection. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day as many as 139 workers, mostly women, were killed in an explosion at the Eddystone Artillery Shell Plant just outside of Philadelphia. The plant, owned by Baldwin Locomotive Works, opened in 1916 and produced munitions for the Russian army. Baldwin also manufactured Enfield rifles and armored tanks for American forces. The United States had just entered World War I days before. Munitions production soared, along with the number of new hires. About 400 women worked at the F building at Eddystone, which was blown to bits. F building was where the powder fuses were manufactured, loaded into artillery shells, and then inspected. On this fateful morning, about 18 tons of black powder ignited, setting off thousands of shrapnel shells. This caused a series of detonations felt as far as 10 miles away. The blast blew some workers through the roof. Others were found nearby in the Delaware River. Of the dead, 55 were never identified. Hundreds more survived and were badly burned or seriously injured. Immediately, German and then Russian immigrants were scapegoated as responsible for the blast. The press shrieked in hysteria over alleged sabotage by German agents opposed to U.S. entry into the war. Others charged that Russian revolutionaries at odds with the Russian White Army were at fault. However, a guard testified that in fact there had been problems with electrically powered powder loading devices that had been malfunctioning for some time. He claimed the wires must have short-circuited and caused the spark. One woman worker insisted as she lay dying that a shell hit the powder and sparked the explosion. The cause of the explosion remains a mystery to this day. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
It's always instructive to hear powerful political officials declare that in the name of democracy, they must usurp the people's democratic authority. This has become all too common, as even so-called democratic regimes in France and Israel have infuriated their people by trying to ram vastly unpopular anti-democratic schemes into law by executive fiat. Luckily, though, our U.S. of A. remains committed to the people's rule, right? Moreover, our leaders agree that local government is best for it's closest to the people, right? No, and no. Since the once conservative Republican Party has turned extremist and downright goofy during the past decade, its governors and lawmakers have become knee-jerk autocrats, imposing their unpopular policies through a crude power play called preemption. This is the despotic use of arbitrary state power to cancel any town, city, or county policies that Republican politicians don't like. Preemption is an extreme governing tool meant to be rarely used in emergency situations. But GOP-controlled state houses in Florida, Texas, Ohio, and elsewhere now use it routinely as an ideological sledgehammer, crushing the right of local people to govern themselves. This has led extremist Republican officials force some of their racist, homophobic, and xenophobic nastiness on communities that vehemently oppose them. But most Republican preemptions are issued in service to corporate elites. For example, when local communities try to raise the minimum wage or prevent corporate money from corrupting local politics, corporate-serving governors rush to outlaw the people's will. This is Jim Hightower saying Texas lawmakers are even trying to supersize and privatize preemption with a blanket decree that all local ordinances restricting corporations are overruled by state law.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we talked about the other day, the two Justins, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, who were expelled from the Tennessee General Assembly, they have both been reinstated by the committees that their counties had. They're back in the General Assembly, and they're going to run for re-election, and I guarantee they're going to win overwhelmingly. Which makes me go, why would the Republicans have done this? Makes no sense on its face, other than, well, they really do want to destroy democracy. This is a show of power, or is it a show of stupidity? Here to share some thoughts on which way this falls, I've asked my good friend Will Bunch to come talk with us. Will is a national columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's also written the great book After the Ivory Tower Falls: How College Broke the American Dream and Blew Up Our Politics, and How to Fix It. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me. You know what they say, no Justins, no peace, right? So well, tonight we have one Justin, so I guess we have some peace. So
but this was predictable. The Republicans had to know that once they threw these two out, and oddly enough didn't throw out the white women, and we'll get to that, but they had to know that this was going to at some level backfire. Or what's your thought?
I don't, I'm I'm still trying to wrap my head around it because you're right. I mean, they expelled these guys. I mean, they had to know how the system and the process works, and they had to know that these democratic county committees and city councils that vote on this, we're gonna send them back, and they're gonna. I mean, this is just the temporary appointment, but then they're gonna run in these special elections in these districts that they won in 2022, and they're going to win again. Everybody knows they're going to win. So it was interesting. I was like trying to figure out. I'm thinking like, well, are they going to not seat them when they get reappointed? Because there is precedent for that. Believe it or not, I actually wrote. It's funny. I didn't write about it in my column because it was kind of between columns, but I did a long thread on Twitter about the case of Julian Bond, the famous civil rights activist who in 1966 was not seated because right before he was supposed to take his seat, he spoke out against the Vietnam War and made some comments about the draft, and they thought that was unpatriotic. It was very similar in a way to today and the gun violence issue, but he actually won two special elections to take back his seat, and he wasn't seated three times before it finally took the Supreme Court to say that the legislature had violated his First Amendment rights and basically forced them to seat Julian Bond. So I was wondering. It just seems like today's Republicans, there's no limits to how far or how low, I think I said in the column,
Yeah.
they're willing to go to make this power play, and they want to legitimize certain things. They want to legitimize votes in cities that come from Black and brown communities, which in this, like you said, they kicked out the two Black urban legislators, and they allowed the white woman from Knoxville to retain her seat, albeit by one vote. But
I mean, just the image of that alone. I mean, if
yeah,
if you're doing this, you got to throw her out too, just to make it look like non-partial, or nonpartisan. But they didn't. They someone said no, we're going to make this worse.
It's a power play that we don't care how it looks, and what I can't figure out is, did they sit in a room and say we're going to do a power play, we don't care how it looks, or are they just that dumb that they didn't see how, because as it turns out, I mean, when tonight Justin Jones led a march back to the Capitol, and he was sworn in on the steps, and they put out a statement saying, yeah, well, that's the procedure, and so we're going to let him back in. So they basically, the Republicans basically backed down tonight. They didn't go crazy and try and not seat him a second time.
Well, they're going to have to, because they realize they screwed up. But in your most recent article, which I highly suggest folks take a look at, titled "GOP Wages Asymmetrical War on Democracy Because It Can't Get the Votes," you had what I think is the perfect line. You said citizens who cling to "it can't happen here" need to look at what is happening right now. And I got to tell you, that's a perfect statement.
Yeah, well, this has been happening gradually. In terms of, if you go back 20 years ago, the strategy we were looking at was voter suppression, right? How do we make it hard for people who aren't our voters to cast their ballots? With voter ID and other restrictions, or taking away polling places, closing polling places on college campuses, or closing polling places in Black neighborhoods. And it was, how do we make it hard for people to vote? And the phase we've gotten to now is just throwing out the results of elections, basically. I mean, they won't call it that, but the pretexts are so flimsy. So we saw it in Tennessee with the two Justins. I mean, look, if they'd wanted to pass a reprimand saying you shouldn't have protested on the House floor, I don't know. I would have shrugged. It's like, all right, it's a reprimand. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it was a technical violation of the rules, but they had to invalidate this election. They had to tell 140,000 people your vote didn't count. But the thing, and after Tennessee, maybe this is even less likely to happen. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen. But in I start the piece talking about the election in Wisconsin because I think two things happened there that really dramatize what's going on right now. One is just the victory, and I have to apologize because I read her name all the time, but I never try and pronounce it. So don't you can pronounce the name of the new Democratic justice for me because I can't pronounce.
Yeah, we're in the same boat, so thanks for throwing that back to me.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't know. Janet, let's just call her Janet by her first name. So Janet P's victory in Wisconsin, huge voter turnout, the largest turnout for a non-presidential election of that type ever in Wisconsin history. I started with the example of the college town of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is home to the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire. In a precinct that basically is in the student center, so it's the college voting precinct. Largest turnout of any precinct in the city of Eau Claire, and 888 students came out to vote, 6 times the number of people, or 6 times the number of student voters that they had in the similar election 4 years earlier. And there were two issues, right? One was abortion. I mean, that was probably the biggest issue. And the other was democracy. I mean, Janet's opponent, Dan Kelly, was somebody who had actually worked for Trump in 2020 to try and throw out Wisconsin's election results. And I think you had a lot of voters who are saying we're just not going to stand for this guy who's going to take away our abortion rights, who's going to take away our voting rights. I don't care if it's an off-year election. I'm going to wait on this line for 2 hours and I'm going to vote. And look, I mean, I'm not endorsing voting lines. People shouldn't have to wait 2 hours to vote, but the fact that people are willing to do that, I mean, that's democracy in action. Yeah. I mean, and to me, so that's the Democrats winning by conventional warfare when you comes to politics, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to win the war of ideas. You've got our ideas on rights, on voting, on abortion. Our ideas are better, and you're going to come out and vote for us at the ballot box, and they're going to count all the votes. And if you like our ideas and our candidate best, we'll win and we'll take office. And that's how it's supposed to work. And it seems even silly to talk about that because that's how it's supposed to be. But Republicans have realized that they're not winning that way. They've lost the popular vote in 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections. They seriously underperformed in the last 2 midterms as well. And now they're getting blown out. I mean, so Janet beats Dan Kelly by 11 points in this state that Joe Biden only won by 20,000 votes. And the Republicans are panicking. And so they are trying to undo democracy. And Tennessee was one example, but in Wisconsin, you have state legislators, state lawmakers seriously talking about impeaching this new justice before she's even taken the oath of office.
Yeah, in fact, that actually came up even before the election. That was something that he would be open to. And you go,
this guy was running. This guy was running in a special election in I forget. I think it was outside of Milwaukee. But if the Republican won this special election, and it's a Republican district, if the Republican won, the Republicans would have a supermajority in Madison, in the state capital, which means they could do things like, pass impeachment on a party line vote. And the guy who was running in that special election said he was seriously considering impeaching her if she won. And I guess the pretext, and we're seeing this a lot. They're using criminal justice and crime as a pretext, right? They're saying that because they're Democratic DAs, progressive liberal DAs in these cities, and progressive liberal judges, and they're letting criminals. This I'm now I'm
That's the
quoting
argument. The argument is they're
the
letting all the
argument.
criminals
Yeah,
out.
yeah, they're letting off criminals. They're letting criminals run wild in these cities, and that's an impeachable offense.
It's the
I
reason
mean,
that DeSantis got rid of Andrew Warren, who we've had on the
yeah,
program a couple of times.
and here in Philadelphia, where I am, with the very progressive prosecutor Larry Krasner was impeached by the House Republicans. It was held up in the courts, and the Senate realized it was so ridiculous they're not going to actually vote on it. So he'll just have this impeachment on his record that they never tried him or voted.
I actually like him. I've had him on the show a couple of times. Good
he's
guy.
great. I mean, yeah, and he's like any political figure. I don't 100% agree with everything he does,
but I don't 100% agree with anything I do.
Yeah, no, same, right? So, but yeah, I mean, he's taking Philadelphia in the right direction. I mean, his office has now liberated, I think, 28 people who were wrongfully convicted of murder in Philadelphia, for example. And we need stuff like that. And that people don't credit that. It's they blame him. They blame him for murders, which how you blame a district attorney for a murder, haven't quite figured that out. But
yeah.
But they do that, and So, but all over the country, in Kim Gardner, the DA in St. Louis, they're trying to strip her power away. There's been a lot of attention because it kind of relates to the Trump investigations, but there's been a lot of attention to this bill in Georgia that, again, would give Republican legislators the power to remove these prosecutors like Fani Willis in Atlanta. And it's this war. And what do these people have in common? They were elected by an urban electorate. They were elected by people not like them, by black and brown voters, or college educated white liberals, maybe in some cases, but they were elected by the enemies of today's Republicans, the woke left that they're at war with. And they're coming up with these pretexts now to, like I said, they've gone beyond trying to make it hard to vote. They're just going to take away your vote.
No, and that's sadly where we're heading. And again, I go back to the quote, because we all look at the the fascist era of the past and ask the question, you didn't say it can't happen here. How could that possibly happen? And as you point out, maybe take a look at what's going on, at what they're actually doing. I do want to get your thoughts on the RNC going to Nashville on Friday to hold their little shindig. Kind of interesting timing. I know this has been long planned, but kind of more attention on them. Yeah,
I'm sure. I'm sure they regret now that they're going there, but in a way, but they can't undo it. Yeah, they're really in a catch-22. I mean, if their thing is that they can't win elections anymore and they have to do these other things to get around, they have to do these workarounds to get around elections. It's this downward spiral, because the more, I mean, how many more votes did they lose from young voters with what happened in Tennessee last week? I mean, they're really losing a whole generation. I don't think I mentioned in that precinct in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where college students lined up to vote. I mean, they voted 87% Democratic.
Wow.
And you can say college kids have always leaned liberal to some extent, but not at the numbers we're seeing.
And well, no, you could always say they've, and this is always the problem. You can always say they've leaned Democratic, but do they get out and vote? And in this moment, they have, which is why I said from the beginning, undoing Roe was a horrible thing for Republicans, because this was going to continually bite them. And it's going to, especially as Republicans show who they are by coming out with these even more draconian, these more outrageous, we want to track your menstruation cycle kind of bills. I mean, it's getting crazier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the dad of I have a millennial daughter. She just turned 30 late last year, actually, and so her and I know a lot of her friends, and they've been very politically activated these last few years, and it started with Trump, and then it just went right into this abortion thing, and look, in America, America's not like other countries that, have mandatory voting or have a tradition of 90% voter turnout or whatever. When I was growing up, voter turnout in this country was what, 50%. It's better than that now, but it's still a game of, if you can get people really worked up who weren't voting and get them to come out to vote. That's basically, I hate to say it, but it's basically how Trump won in 2016, that he excited a lot of people in, these places like Altoona and these rural
places that used to be somebody. Places that used to have manufacturing, places that used to have opportunity,
right. And those people had gotten so despondent, right, that they weren't voting in big numbers.
Yep.
And Trump, who to their ears was, quote, telling it like it is, unquote, got them excited and got the people, and you had people lining up in those communities to vote. And and Trump won in 2016. He got 74 million votes in 2020, which is amazing, but he also alienated these young people and other voters to the extent where Biden got 81 million votes.
And fortunately, and I think we're moving in a decent direction. I like the policies coming out of this administration, but I hope folks will check out the new piece, Will, GOP Wages Asymmetrical War on Democracy, because it can't get the votes, written by our good friend Will Bunch over at the Philadelphia Inquirer. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Will, I appreciate the time. As always, incredible work. Hope folks will check it out.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Outstanding. Our good friend Will Bunch. Again, make sure you take a look at the piece. We'll get links out on social media. Again, take a quick break. Right back after this with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people of the talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2006. That was the day of massive protests for immigrants' rights in cities throughout the United States. Starting in March of 2006, there was a series of coordinated protests in response to a bill passed by the United States House of Representatives. The bill would classify undocumented workers as felons, and it proposed a wall be built along 1/3 of the U.S.-Mexican border. In total, more than 5 million people across the country protested that spring. And on this day, protests were held in more than 100 cities. On May 1st, or May Day, large protests reached numbers not seen since the civil rights demonstrations of the 1960s. CNN described the impact of the protests in Chicago, reporting kids skipped school, men and women walked off their jobs, others didn't bother to go to work, businesses shut down for lack of patrons or employees. The protesters dubbed the May Day event a day without immigrants. The aim was to withhold immigrant labor and buying power to show their impact on the U.S. economy. A study by the Pew Hispanic Center found that at the time, undocumented workers made up 24% of farm labor and 14% of construction labor in the United States. The protests had had an impact. The bill that would harshen penalties for undocumented workers did not pass the Senate. The AFL-CIO also recognized the importance of reaching out to immigrant workers. In August of 2006, the AFL-CIO introduced a National Worker Center partnership. For the first time, worker centers, many of which organize immigrant workers, could enter into formal partnerships with the AFL-CIO. Working with immigrant workers remains an important front in today's labor movement.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So what I find interesting, and again, this is the folks over at the Federal Railroad Administration, they've come out and said that the railroads have to prioritize train makeup to maintain safety, prevent accidents, and optimize train performance. Now, you may remember when we were talking about the derailments a couple months ago, back after the February 3rd, derailment in East Palestine. One of our guests said, look, these railroad companies are making these big, long trains, and they're not distributing the weight. They're throwing heavy trains on the end, and there's no real rhyme or reason, whereas in the old days, as somebody who drives a truck, the heavy, and I've driven doubles for most of my life, the heavy trailer goes in front, the light trailer goes in back, just because of gravity and momentum and all of that stuff. So what their argument is that these train companies are going, you know what, these train barons are going, just slap them all together and get them down the road. Don't care. And what's causing it is having more weight at the back end, pushing everything forward and causing these derailments and then making them worse. And the reason they're doing it, of course, it's the money. It's the money, like everything else. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on one. Alice, how are you?
Totally insane and disturbed.
What has you today?
Huh?
What has you today?
Everything. So what I wanted to say was, you at the beginning of the show, you were talking about the divisions between, the two different groups, and I think to a degree that's true. But I think the main issue is number one, we have this collection of the right-wing Republican voters that have been so brainwashed that by lies, that, we're a Christian nation and you got to do this, and the preachers jumped in on it. And then you have the politicians screaming and telling all these lies that simply aren't true. And, we can reason with someone that's reasonable and come to some sort of agreement, that, okay, we both want children to be safe and we want this and we want that. But that small group, which seems to be growing, I don't think there's any reasoning with them, Rick. I don't think there's...
And there's some people you're never going to reach. This is where the majority of people who are still reachable have to come together. And right. I've come into this mindset of, if I'm going to be canceled, I'm going to be canceled, because the extremes I don't care about anymore. We've got to move forward and figure out the stuff that's important and do it in a way that gives people the opportunity to lead their best lives. That's, again, my true north. If I step on some toes, I'm okay with that.
Right, and I'm with you. Everybody has individual differences and ideas. But I think the main thing that we're going to have to do is something's going to have to be done about these propaganda stations and the propaganda being pushed by the right-wing politicians. You have a good day.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate it. And look, the reality is what has to happen is there needs to be, I'm someone who believes in more speech, not less. More opportunities to talk to people. We need to come back to the reality that our politics should be where we solve problems, not cause them. And sadly, over the last several years, with the rise of the Tea Party and the rise of the Freedom Caucus and the rise of all of these moneyed groups who are being funded by billionaires, it's more about division than it is about getting stuff done. It's more about causing problems than fixing problems. And look, here's the thing. This is where the hope is. When I talk to individuals, and even ones wearing the shirt a lot of the times, the hat's a different story, but the shirt, if they got the shirt on, because without the hat, I think the brain still functions. I can get a lot of people who bought the shirt going, yeah, that's reasonable. There is a way to talk to people, and in fact, in Wisconsin, the reason that they got such a great turnout is they did what I've been saying you need to do. You need to start not talking to people. You get friends and neighbors talking to each other. You get coworkers talking to each other. You get people sharing their stories, their ideas, their hopes, their thoughts, their dreams. That's the way forward. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Grab the podcast. Back after this.
It's definitely an eye-opener. Things can change in an instant.
Another deadly tornado outbreak ravages several states with more twisters on the way.
When you take on big oil, they usually roll you. That's exactly what they've been doing to consumers for years and years and years.
California enacts first-in-the-nation law to rein in big oil price gouging. Plus,
it was a historic moment for for the climate justice movement.
The tiny nation of Vanuatu gets UN to address climate justice.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The Biden administration, and unfortunately the Democrats in Congress, keep pushing these Green New Deal style agendas. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, they just don't work. The wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine in East Tennessee, and I'm sure that's the way it is across this great nation.
Hey, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, you ever heard about batteries? Just asking for a few million people and for your grandkids. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, another weekend full of deadly tornadoes.
Yes, the third tornado outbreak in just 3 weeks hit the Midwest and the Southeast over the weekend, killing at least 32 people and causing widespread damage across several states, according to officials. But the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center warns that those areas will have no time to recover before the next round of dangerous storms takes aim at the same areas. While the exact influence of climate change on tornadoes is inconclusive due to lack of data, studies do show that tornado swarms are increasing in frequency and severity because of man-made global warming.
They sure seem to be.
The UK's Guardian reports on new research out of Australia suggesting that melting ice around Antarctica will cause a rapid slowdown of a major global deep ocean current that helps circulate ocean heat energy around the planet. The study projects that if nations fail to cut emissions that cause global warming, then melting fresh water off the coast of Antarctica is likely to disrupt and slow that deep sea current by 40% in just the next 30 years. That's a slowdown that would alter the world's climate for centuries to come and accelerate sea level rise. Meanwhile, a new study in the journal Nature confirms previous findings that the burden of sea level rise is larger, its effects will hit earlier than anticipated, and rising seas will threaten areas not expecting it due to what the researchers call indirect effects. Indirect effects of rising seas are things like damage to critical infrastructure, like repeatedly inundated roads, bridges, and railroads that can cut off communities that need help for long periods of time. But many communities, they say, are unaware of this risk exposure.
So expect the unexpected at this point?
Exactly. But some good news. The Department of the Interior this week announced that the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement has cleared the way for the nation's first ever commercial-scale offshore wind energy project. And offshore turbine construction can begin off the coasts of Rhode Island and New York, a major milestone toward meeting President Biden's goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of U.S. offshore wind energy by 2030.
Well, don't tell Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
In California, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom has signed into law the nation's first penalty for price gouging at the pump.
Good.
It was triggered by gas price spikes last summer that pushed prices to near record highs in the state. The new law gives the State Energy Commission the authority to subpoena private internal oil industry data to investigate whether oil companies are price gouging and punish those companies for excess windfall profits. The state's powerful oil industry spent millions of dollars trying to block the law, but Newsom signed it late last week.
We proved we could actually beat big oil.
Well, we'll see.
Yes. And finally, a new United Nations resolution introduced by the low-lying Pacific Island nation of Vanuatu and passed unanimously could be a significant first step in making it easier to hold polluting countries and companies legally accountable for failing to tackle the climate crisis. The resolution calls on the International Court of Justice to issue an advisory opinion establishing each government's obligations under international law for addressing global warming impacts. That could affect big oil companies facing civil liability lawsuits in courts around the world for knowingly producing planet-warming emissions while deceiving the public about it for decades. Here's Vanuatu's Prime Minister before the landmark vote at the UN.
Together, we will send a loud and clear message not only around the world, but far into the future, that on this very day, the peoples of the United Nations decided to tackle the defining challenge of our times, climate change.
For much more on all of these stories and the many we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.brandblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you remember last week we were talking about this Albert Edwards. He's a global strategist for, I think it's Societe Generale. It's a big French bank. They're one of the big players globally. Been in business about 159 years, they say. But this guy, got a little attention last week. Taking my word, greedflation. I don't own it, but that and saying, look, this could be, as I've been saying for a while, we're in the final throes of capitalism. This could be the end of the road if we don't do some things. That it's gotten so unequal that, maybe we're going to have societal unrest. And I look at what's going on in France with working people going into the streets and saying, no, you're not going to raise our retirement age from 62 to 64. And me scratching my head going, we can't get Americans into the street to do anything. Imagine. But I thought about this, and one of his arguments is we need price controls. And here to share some thoughts on, are we seeing the end stage? Is there something we can do with this massive inflation? And is price controls the answer? That's why I've asked our good friend Mateus Vernengo to come talk with us. Mateus is an economics professor at Bucknell University. Mateus, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Rick.
So, do you agree with this guy? I mean, is he onto something here that, this is capitalism dying, the end? Do you buy into that?
Certainly we are. I mean, I think it's a very bold prediction. What we do know is the following thing. So I'm not sure that it's the end of capitalism, but it's the end of what we are seeing, and we're in danger in the U.S. It's the end of democratic institutions. We're risking that. So people that are sort of angry about the inequalities, the effects of inflation on their everyday life, the conditions of the labor market. I mean, labor market, the numbers were reasonably good, but I mean in general, not unemployment level, but the sort of harsh conditions that we have had for 40 years. We have talked about this in the program several times. So I think that suggests that we might veer away from democratic capitalism. I don't think that there is any danger that corporations are going to be brought down by the pitchforks and the peasants with the pitchforks. I wish that was sort of and socialism was around, some sort of form of democratic socialism was around the corner. But what I see and fear that it's a risk is more some degree of fascistic takeover of democracy. And I'm sorry to say that I think it's a danger. So while I disagree on the kind of danger that that we have in the system, I think he's not wrong in suggesting that there is something deeply wrong with capitalism, and that there is something deeply dangerous about what's going on, not just in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. it's sort of problematic because we're at the it is still the center of it's 25% of global consumption. It's still the largest, if not in absolute terms economy, it's one of the largest, and certainly the central economy in the world economy. So all of those things, make the situation in the U.S. considerably sort of, concerning.
Yeah. No,
so I would agree with that general assessment. Yes.
Yeah. You said we're not going to get the pitchforks and go after the corporations, and I would argue it's because we've been fed on a silver platter that it's Joe Biden and government. Especially progressive policies and democratic government, that's the problem. And I get this from people a lot. Well, it's all Biden's policies, all these these socialist problems, this safety net stuff that's caused this. I'm going, no. It's monopoly. It's the fact that you got a handful of corporations who control virtually everything we touch.
And that's insane. We have had exactly what we have had for 40 years since Reagan. It's the undoing of those sort of semi mixed economy socialist social democratic policies that provided a safety net. So over the last 40 years we have gone in the other direction with both governments. There has been with both parties, Republicans and Democrats. Clinton certainly was in that direction, ending welfare as we knew it, or whatever it was. The sort of mild pushback that we got was important, but mild. So we got extension of public health through private means with Obama. And we got now, for the first time, it's a first. We have some policies to try to reshore manufacturing jobs to the United States. Some pushback on trying to hold the line, on further privatization of our economy and so on and so forth. But even with all of this, Biden couldn't pass everything he wanted on the fiscal, in fiscal policy. We haven't been able to increase the minimum wage. The minimum wage remains, at the 2009 level. So if this is, socialism in action, it's, you have to be deluded, and that's another problem of what we have had, and that's why I don't think that socialism and the end of capitalism it's the danger. It's misinformation is widespread, and it has sort of furthered some of the structural problems with the American economy. So I think that we're in danger of the danger comes from the far right, not from the left, including the violence, I should say.
Now, the reason I bring this up is because his prescription was maybe looking at price controls. And, everything that I've learned about price controls over the years was it's all bad and brought down the Roman Empire or whatever the argument is. I know we had some in the 70s, and I've had people tell me, no, that led to stagflation. Do price controls work? I mean, look, again, this is just what's being thrown at me. That's why I've come to you, the expert on this. Is it time for price controls? And I'm guessing this guy, who's a French economist, is saying for France and for the rest of the world, because I don't think it ever happens here.
Yeah, no, I don't think. I think you're right. So, in fact, he cites a paper by Isabella Weber that it's actually on the journal I edit, and I have a paper too. So I'm going to talk to this guy because he cites Isabella, but he doesn't cite me. And I have a paper on the same issue of the review of Keynesian economics. But the point is, yes, price controls do work. They have worked historically. They in the U.S. the typical example of working price controls was during the Second World War. They were extensively used, and they were very efficient in holding inflation. We still had inflation, but on levels that were more acceptable. And Nixon used them. That's correct. That it's the last time that they were used. They have been used in Spain to some, with some degree of effectiveness. For example, one of the items that inflation has been high in the U.S. It's rent. Rent control is a price control, and they do work. And so Spain has had some of that, and they have had good effects. In Bolivia, they have them. Bolivia has had one of the lowest inflation rates in the world. Part of what they have is they have chains of markets that are government owned. And when some company decides to hike the price of something that it's a basic good that the population has to consume, whatever, flour, they sell their stocks of in the public stores of flour at a lower price, and they hold down the price line. And so price controls in places in which the government owns a significant large a portion of the energy companies, they control prices, and that has happened, and so that has allowed to hold the price of, say, gas in many countries. So they obviously can work, and what's central for them to work is you need bureaucracy and an infrastructure that allows you to go and control prices, and you need obviously political backing for this kind of stuff. And exactly that goes to the point that you said. Although they can work, it's highly unlikely that they would even pass in the United States. And if they pass, that we would give the instruments for them to work. So, for example, we don't give the IRS the instruments for them to go. I mean, if you wanted to catch all of the tax evasion that there is in the U.S. from the very wealthy, we can. We have the funded. I mean, part of the point of Republican governments is and administrations, and when they're in control of Congress, is they defund and they make sure that government is inefficient. The old joke that they think government doesn't work, and when they go to work, to government, they make sure it doesn't. And so I think that's the problem with price controls. It's not that they cannot work; is that it's very unlikely that we can get that implemented. And there are many places in which they should be. For example, medication, insulin, which the Biden administration tried to do something about that. So that should be controlled. So
Right.
markets shouldn't be determining, and corporations shouldn't be a for-profit thing. So this, it's a basic thing. So who thinks that this thing that, the guys that invented didn't have a patent for this, that they gave it up for humanity so that we can cure something that it's a terrible disease. It's cheap to produce, and we're allowing people to die in the United States when, in developing countries, they get this for cheap and they don't die on this. We're allowing people to die in the United States because they don't have insulin. So that's the kind of thing in which price controls do work. And any decent person with half a brain knows that. So you don't need to be, I'm sorry to say, an expert to say that.
Any decent person with half a brain. Wow. I don't know what segment of the population that in this day and age that would exclude. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Mateus Fernango, professor of economics at Bucknell, talking about the most recent piece over at Fortune magazine, asking are we in the end of capitalism? Price controls possible? Now, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, as a truck driver, I go back to the 70s. From the end of World War II up until Reagan, really, you had the ICC deciding what the rates were. You had until 96 here in Pennsylvania, you had electric rates that had to be sought after. So it's not unprecedented to where we have these price caps.
The price controls were a normal thing. They were part and parcel of how capitalism always worked. Prices are to great extent. Obviously, there is an element of price that they involve covering your costs and making some buck for the owners of capital. But from then on, prices are administered prices. They're managed, and so and there are many conditions they vary from sector to sector. But for example, we made decisions in the United States to allow pharmaceutical firms to take control of a great degree of what and how they price their medications. The model is that they run the risk. They don't. The federal government through the NIH gives them lots of money to do research and development and whatnot. So the risk part of doing the research to whether they're going to find a medication is paid by everybody, but they act as if it's their risk, and hence they have to have a huge reward for the risk that they incurred.
Right.
And we allow them then to get out with murder. And in this particular industry, and that's why I'm going back to pharmaceutical, it's murder. In the in the trucking industry, it has social consequences. They overwork truck drivers, because in order to make a buck, they'll have to do and drive too many hours and so on and so forth. We give Amazon tells you next day delivery, so we have all sorts of violations of of what's reasonable conditions of work and so on and so forth. But they don't necessarily directly kill people like the insulin issue or whatnot and other things in the pharmaceutical.
That's an excellent point. But we're sold on this, and you as an economics professor, I'm sure you know this as well as anyone. We're sold on this idea of the invisible hand, that the market will always decide, and the market knows best, Mateus. The market knows best, and if you don't like it, you can abstain. Because in a free market, one of the key tenets is that you have the ability to not participate. But as you've laid out in pharmaceuticals, I don't know how many people can choose not to participate, especially if you're a diabetic in need of insulin.
Yeah, well, this notion, in all fairness, I think that part of the story of we believed in invisible hand up to the point in which we got afraid that the system would sort of tumble down. And that was the 30s. So in the 30s, there was a decision that market would be allowed to play up to a point, but under certain areas, we would guarantee. So that's when we came up with guarantees of income in old age, Social Security, minimum wage, certain regulation and rights in the in the working sort of environment. So all of those things came because capitalists were afraid of the end of capitalism that you were talking here. I think that the huge difference of that period with the current period is that the threat of the end of capitalism in the 30s was more real than people tend to think these days. So I don't think that the Chinese, sort of alternative is seen as an alternative in the way that in the 30s, the Soviet, the Russians were seen as a possible alternative. So that sort of scared the hell out of capitalists, and I think that played a role that we don't have these days. And so, the level of organization of the working class, it's not where it was. So we're not in the same place historically. That's why I fear that, if there is sort of a backlash and the system is sort of tumbling, it's not in the direction of a better system, as the article suggests. But I'm sorry, I'm very afraid that and to be blunt, I'm very afraid that forget price controls. We're unable to pass legislation to God knows what will happen this summer with the debt ceiling. We are already with the Fed that it's hiking interest rates to stop an inflation that has nothing to do with excess demand, that may already have led us to a recession, even if we manage to pass all of the fiscal difficulties. And then we'll have an economy coming into the election next year in which we have a recession. The war may still be going on and inflation might still be sort of raging, although it has been down for a while. And we have, Trump that, it's indicted, but maybe not in jail, maybe not ineligible. And it seems to be up in the polls, and we get up, with another presidency of Trump. It's not unthinkable. And I don't know what the consequences of that.
Well, we'll see where it goes and where it takes us. But Mateus, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing your expertise and thoughts on this. Again, we'll have you back to talk about this more, because this to me is one of the most important stories that nobody's talking about.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Mateus Fernango. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today, Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed a $150 million personal income tax cut, $36 million corporate tax cut. Any idea who that's going to all go to? They claim it's going to put money back into the pockets of 1.1 million Arkansanians. And I guess it's only the beginning. This is just the beginning. She says they're going to continue to cut the income tax, to wipe it off the books. And this made me think today. This made me think, as I've said before, you've got states like Arkansas that are Huckabee Sanders herself said, we don't want that hand of Washington doing anything. Well, take your money. Take your money. Oh, will we? And we'll take a lot of it. But you don't get to have any say here. And this is one of those moments where I'm reading through this going, couldn't this money have been spent better? Maybe, I don't know, working on ending child hunger and, homeless veterans, infrastructure, any number of things. Because I've been through Arkansas. Sorry, there's a lot of work needs to be done there. And we've got a federal government who's doing a lot of work there. So it's interesting that we're taking federal dollars and handing it out. And you remember during the pandemic, states were given a whole bunch of money to run social programs, and a lot of them used that money for tax cuts for rich people. This is where I in talking with Mateus and looking at this article over at Fortune, which I think extremely, extremely important, and the position that this guy, this Albert Edwards takes, is something we should be talking about. Because as Mateus said, we're not our grandparents' generation. We're not that generation of working people that are out in the streets fighting for better opportunities. We're now fighting over the worst stuff. I mean, they're talking about raising retirement age to 70. They're talking about all kinds of stuff because as the one Republican guy said, people want to work till 70. Yeah, maybe there's somebody out there who does, but a lot of people, not so much. They'd like to retire and play with their grandkids, or just have a life. But I look at this, and the fact of the matter is who was it over at the Roosevelt Institute who said that 52% of the inflation, 52% of the inflation that we're suffering under, is because of this greedflation, because of these corporations. And I cited the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City's report that found that markup growth had increased in the ratio between pricing and what so what they make it for and what they sell it for. That markup growth is enormous, and that was how did they put it? A far more important factor in driving inflation than anything else. The fact that corporations saw an opportunity, and there was nothing there to hold them in check. There was no competition because there's only a handful of companies doing it. This kind of, and where there is a modicum of competition, there's collusion. Because interestingly enough, they're right around the same area. I had a conversation today with somebody about eggs. And I said, you ever walk into a store and find no eggs? I remember the toilet paper scares of the great pandemic of 2020. I remember, the fact that you would go into the supermarket and there were no rolls. And there's no Sears catalog coming anymore, so who knows what you were going to do. I remember at the time going, not surprising they're selling a roll of toilet paper for $100 on eBay. Some idiot might buy it. But you go to the grocery store now, their eggs are plentiful. And as the guy said today, I go, no, I've never noticed there to be a shortage of eggs. Oh, of course. So then why the really inflated cost? I mean, the multiples of the original price. Profit. Pure, unadulterated, greed-driven profit. Now, look, I'm not somebody who's against profit, but it's when it gets outrageous, and it's something that you can't abstain from. It's something you can't walk away from. As I said, the other day, I was going to buy a car, and we agreed on a price, and a couple of days later, that person comes back and says, hey, I'm raising the price 50%. And why? Because I can. And you go, well, then you can take that car and drive it right up where the sun doesn't shine. That's me exercising my ability to not participate in this market. Most people don't have that opportunity with food or medicine or you name the necessity. This is where there's part of me that goes, I'm not totally against the idea of price controls. They worked pretty well in the trucking industry when the ICC was setting rates and companies were competing on service and competing on quality and competing on how to do things better instead of, who's willing to slit each other's throats for pennies. Want to hear your thoughts, though? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You will certainly find ours. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2006. That was the day of massive protests for immigrants' rights in cities throughout the United States. Starting in March of 2006, there was a series of coordinated protests in response to a bill passed by the United States House of Representatives. The bill would classify undocumented workers as felons, and it proposed a wall be built along 1/3 of the U.S.-Mexican border. In total, more than 5 million people across the country protested that spring. And on this day, protests were held in more than 100 cities. On May 1st, or May Day, large protests reached numbers not seen since the civil rights demonstrations of the 1960s. CNN described the impact of the protests in Chicago, reporting kids skipped school, men and women walked off their jobs, others didn't bother to go to work, businesses shut down for lack of patrons or employees. The protesters dubbed the May Day event a day without immigrants. The aim was to withhold immigrant labor and buying power to show their impact on the U.S. economy. A study by the Pew Hispanic Center found that at the time, undocumented workers made up 24% of farm labor and 14% of construction labor in the United States. The protests had had an impact. The bill that would harshen penalties for undocumented workers did not pass the Senate. The AFL-CIO also recognized the importance of reaching out to immigrant workers. In August of 2006, the AFL-CIO introduced a National Worker Center partnership. For the first time, worker centers, many of which organize immigrant workers, could enter into formal partnerships with the AFL-CIO. Working with immigrant workers remains an important front in today's labor movement.
It's always instructive to hear powerful political officials declare that in the name of democracy, they must usurp the people's democratic authority. This has become all too common, as even so-called democratic regimes in France and Israel have infuriated their people by trying to ram vastly unpopular anti-democratic schemes into law by executive fiat. Luckily, though, our U.S. of A. remains committed to the people's rule, right? Moreover, our leaders agree that local government is best for it's closest to the people, right? No, and no. Since the once conservative Republican Party has turned extremist and downright goofy during the past decade, its governors and lawmakers have become knee-jerk autocrats, imposing their unpopular policies through a crude power play called preemption. This is the despotic use of arbitrary state power to cancel any town, city, or county policies that Republican politicians don't like. Preemption is an extreme governing tool meant to be rarely used in emergency situations. But GOP-controlled state houses in Florida, Texas, Ohio, and elsewhere now use it routinely as an ideological sledgehammer, crushing the right of local people to govern themselves. This has led extremist Republican officials force some of their racist, homophobic, and xenophobic nastiness on communities that vehemently oppose them. But most Republican preemptions are issued in service to corporate elites. For example, when local communities try to raise the minimum wage or prevent corporate money from corrupting local politics, corporate-serving governors rush to outlaw the people's will. This is Jim Hightower saying Texas lawmakers are even trying to supersize and privatize preemption with a blanket decree that all local ordinances restricting corporations are overruled by state law.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, most recent ABC News Ipsos poll finds 53% of Americans polled believe Donald Trump intentionally did something wrong. I don't know if this is going the way the Trumpers want it to go, but when you got 53%, a majority of the country saying, yeah, he did something wrong, and on purpose, and you have another 11% saying, yeah, he acted wrong, but he didn't really mean it. So you got 64% of people going, yeah, he broke the law. It's a pretty big deal. Interestingly enough, only 20% believe Trump did nothing wrong. That means some Trumpers, like a neighbor who is now flying a Ron DeSantis flag, are turning on the Donald. And look, he's broken another rule, another crime. This time, evidently, he didn't meet the deadline for disclosing his personal financial holdings for campaign finance purposes. Now, it's not a big deal. It's a $200 slap on the wrist. But again, it shows, one, not really caring about the laws, and two, just how weak those laws are. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day and all we can get to, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you, Rick.
So we surprised that many people think Trump did something wrong?
I was surprised. Now, also in an additional poll that I saw, they had 70, and this was really interesting. The vast majority of people felt that the charge was shaky, okay, on the surface. And I think that's because so many people have, talked about the charge itself being not the most solid charge, right? But it goes from that to 60% think he did something wrong. So even if they think that the charge was, maybe not well written or, not intense enough or whatever, still the vast majority think, believe that he's done something wrong. And then with the ABC News Ipsos poll that you had just talked about, majority of Americans, like you said, 53% believe he intentionally did something illegal. So the numbers for him are still there base-wise somewhat, but they're not there as they should be. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and what I find interesting is most of the people who I know who are the big Red Hat clan, they'll say, yeah, he did it. Yeah, he did something wrong, but we don't care. And that's the thing that these polls don't talk about. How many people go, yeah, so what? He's done so many other worse things than lying on a little piece of paper. We don't care about this.
I think, in general, obviously it's really going to hurt him with the independents. The people that have switched back and forth, people that are vote splitters. They've went from different parties, through maybe the last 2 or 3 elections. With them, I can't see where he really could bring them home to himself, unless the president just somehow really, really falters, and then people throw up their hands and say, "What are we doing?"
No, I think he's hurting himself. That speech he gave on Tuesday after the indictment didn't do him any favors, and I love the way Chris Christie framed it, saying he sounded like a guy at a bar that you sat next to who does nothing but talk about a bad divorce. That was the perfect frame.
Right. Yeah, Christie has a good way with words. And then, of course, Barr, his comments on the Sunday show. So, overall, Trump's lost some numbers. And if anything else happens, that will further erode the numbers. So, got some time. We'll see what happens. The other thing is, this trial is not going to be formulated into motion until December, according to the prosecutor's side, and Trump's lawyers want to take it into the first of the year to begin. And I'll tell you right now, with everything that goes on in people's lives, and you know this, retail politics and what counts, with everything going on in people's lives, the last thing that people who are trying to, get out there and eke out a living and take care of their family, the last thing they're going to want to hear week after week, month after month is this trial.
No, you're absolutely right.
I don't want to hear it.
I don't want to hear it. I'm already tired of it. Because look, I think
it hasn't started yet. We're tired of it.
This is one of those things where I'm not a lawyer, but I've talked to a number of people who are, and people who are federal prosecutors and folks who know this. This is a little bit of a stretch, and that's where the argument is. Now, did he break the law? Yeah, they should have charged him with what you would have charged any other Wall Street criminal with when they lie on a report. Fine him, charge him a huge fine, or make him plead guilty to a misdemeanor, and then move on. This moving it up to trying to make it a felony by tying, I don't know. I think it's going to be difficult to prove, but we'll see.
I talked to attorneys, and one in particular who does not like Trump whatsoever, and said basically exactly what you just said. And this attorney doesn't. That's why I called him on purpose, to see what he thought. And he said the same thing. But the other thing is that if Trump is cleared of this, or there's a mistrial, or who knows, with a jury, somebody talks to somebody, a relative then talks to the media. All these scenarios can happen with this because this is a high-profile case. But even if he is cleared, it's people that are out there that are have switched again. Maybe went Trump to Biden, and now what are they going to do? Those people too may look at this and they may not say, "Oh, he was innocent." They may say, "Well, he got by with one more." They might say that. Yeah. So there's variables here that, let's face it, are not to the favor at the end of the day to Donald Trump.
Yeah, but don't you think that also? The same way in the old days they used to root for Bonnie and Clyde and Pretty Boy Floyd and the criminals of the day. Oh, he stuck into the system. Don't you think there's somebody out there looking at Trump going, yeah, he's breaking all these rules. He's criming at every opportunity, and he's flipping his nose at this. Just makes him even more appealing to some.
Yeah, but remember, Bonnie and Clyde and Pretty Boy Floyd and them, they actually threw some of the bank's money to the people. They actually gave them something, all right?
I forgot about that.
Remember that. Trump's not passing out money, so they did. No, but I see your point, and you're right. There are a certain amount of people that say, the system is inherently, this isn't a Democrat or Republican thing necessarily, but some people will say the system, is inherently bad, and these people are all political, all of them. The whole ball of wax, and there'll be some people that will think that way.
Yeah, but at the end,
then there's going to be the deep state believers.
Yeah, but at the end, I think Bonnie and Clyde did end up on the side of the road with a bunch of bullets in them.
Oh yeah,
if I remember right.
They did.
There was that. I wanted to get your thoughts on Jim Jordan from your state of Ohio. Did you see last week them threatening to subpoena Alvin Bragg? Is that something normal?
Well, it's something that shouldn't be done. You can't do that. And if they do that, it's nothing more than interference. Now, they knew they wouldn't be successful because there's no way that Alvin Bragg is going to, number one, comply with that, or number two, have to comply with that. And then the other thing is, do they really want to take the House to a vote on this? I think from Jordan's end, it was more, trying to throw that out for Trump favor, number one.
Yeah.
Throw it out to attempt to, quote, rattle the prosecutor, and throw it out there to get it out there that, the prosecutor's corrupt, we should drag him into Congress. I think that was the motive. I know Jordan can't believe that he will actually be able to get him there and do anything about it. It's a pending court case. And whether anybody likes the case or they don't, it's a pending court case. And you just can't drag the prosecutor out there.
Yeah,
after the case is done, if they want to try something, they could do that.
Because I was wondering
if they have grounds.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing, and I was wondering if your time in Congress, you'd have ever gotten involved with, attempting to strong arm a prosecutor. I just was wondering if that was something that had happened before.
It doesn't happen. The only time that somebody was hit, but that was a whole different world, was Alberto Gonzalez because he was political.
Yeah.
And now that's different. That wasn't a pending case. That was a series of firings and political steps by Gonzalez that got the attention, including the attention of Republicans. And this is different. This is a court case. It would be sort of like Gonzalez at the time was involved with a sitting case, and then they drug him before there during the adjudication of the case. And you can't do that. I don't recall any time where an active case, that a judge in an active case or the prosecutor was ever brought or attempted to be brought before Congress.
I mean, it's just crazy to me. I mean, I know
think it was
his committee is the Weaponization of Government Committee, And this is
and he's using the government.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that
as a
amazing?
weapon. Yes, you're right. That's a good point.
But here, the weaponization of government, chairman, I guess he's House Judiciary Chair as well. Evidently, they've issued another subpoena for FBI Director Christopher Wray. Evidently, they're looking to this now. How's it written? Now withdrawn memo that explored avenues for gaining information on white supremacist interaction with local Catholic churches. So, is he arguing the Catholic churches are now in bed with white supremacists, or is he arguing that the FBI shouldn't be looking into white supremacists? I'm not seeing the angles.
Well, I don't know the angle either, and I'll tell you something else I don't know the angle on. What on earth was his thinking to bring the two former employees of the prosecutor Bragg? What was he thinking about bringing them to Congress? Are they going to sit there and say, "Oh, well, we thought Donald Trump was innocent"? No, they're going to lay out an entire idea of why they think he wasn't innocent and that the prosecutor should have acted before. Now, the nuance here is that Jordan's going to say, "Well, so he didn't act, so why is he acting now?" That's the nuance. But let me tell you, you get those two guys sitting before that committee, trust me, Trump's not going to want to hear that. So I don't know his political thinking on that either.
I don't know that there is, and this is the thing that gets me. Is it all just about, hey, look at me? I mean, because as I started today off with, we can't solve problems. We're just not a country that can solve a problem. We can create a bunch of them, but we don't seem to be able to have a government that will solve, or at least D.C. can't solve anything. And this is another one of these things where you're right. If you call those people in, do you really want the answers that you're going to get? I don't know.
No, not at all. And I'll tell you where some of this is coming from. And some of it is also staff driven. When I was in Congress, and I'm seeing it with the way Jordan operates. When I was in Congress, staff would come up with these intricate plots, these intricate ways to get a witness to say this. And I would sometimes look at them and say, why would I want the witness to say that? I don't want the witness to say that. I would then have to dispute everything. I think some of this is like these theories put together by some of his confidants and staffers, and they have, all 3 or 4 of them are sitting down there, and they bought into each other's nonsense. That's what I think's happened with him. I really do.
No, I think you got people.
Because the way he's operating doesn't make rhyme nor reason.
It does if you look at it from the position that I take. That it's not about solving problems, it's about creating new ones. It's about getting attention. I think if you look at it from that frame, that hey,
true.
let's see what we can stir up to get some attention, to raise campaign funds, to whatever. Or you got people from social media circles going, hey, how can we get the most attention? Then it starts to make a little bit better sense.
Yeah, I agree. Except what's going to eventually happen, though, it's like his weaponization. Look what happened to him. Even inside the Republican Party, they were all saying, "Where's the beef?"
Yeah.
Like the old Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef? Where was it going? He didn't have silver bullets jumping before the committee that everybody said, "Oh wow, that's shock and awe." So he does. I agree. He brings out things. Like I said, I think he and some confidants and political strategists sit down and say, "Well, let's do this now. Let's do that. Let's bring these two guys in." But I just feel, because they're not getting anywhere, if this continues time after time after time, pretty soon, the attention goes away from him, and he's somebody that's not a person of substance.
Yeah, no shock, just a lot of, oh.
Yeah, the short term, he's going to get some entertainment press. In the long term, I think eventually it's like, okay, it's time, you can go away now.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's not a lot of shock, just a lot of, aw, bless your heart. I got to get your thought on this. The guy who's the chairman of the House Federal Foreign Affairs Committee, this Michael McCall, evidently told Fox News that if China invades Taiwan, and we've been talking about this for a while, he believes that there's congressional authority, of using U.S. troops is something, a distinct, how do you put it, a distinct possibility? Thoughts on why this would be a distinct possibility for Republicans, but maybe not Ukraine? Because I see them kind of in the same bag. I'm curious if you got a thought.
I think he actually tied some of it to the chips too, chip production, if I heard one of his scenarios correctly. But he said that the U.S. may send troops to Taiwan. He put it out on the table. Should China invade? And he said, in fact, he said something effective. It certainly would be on the table. That would be discussed by Congress. And I just don't see it. First of all, the Congress is not going to sit there and make a debate on a war resolution. If anything, they're going to let the White House take the lead, and then they can either criticize them or agree with them. Don't let the White House take the lead or not. I just don't see a rally behind, this congressman because he's head of foreign affairs and he says it's troops are on the table. That's not really his call.
Yeah.
Unless he wants to do a resolution, that's not his call.
Yeah,
that's the call of the President of the United States.
I thought it was odd for one of them to come out and say that it's on the table when when they seem so pro-Russia. I don't know. It just seems odd. Lastly,
it might sell well in Texas, though.
Yeah, good point. Lastly, I got to get your thought on this. I know you spend a lot of time in India. This story with the Dalai Lama has got me, and I did bring up the Catholic Church a minute ago, so there might be a tie here. What the hell's with the Dalai Lama? I
am beyond myself. I have had so many phone calls today from friends of mine because we've met with him. I met with him when I was in Congress. Met with him over in Dharamsala. The Dalai Lama has always been this wonderful, person, this icon, and what happened? I mean, I can't put my mind around it. I'm just starting to think that at his age, he's developing a dementia.
Okay, so we're going with the
maybe
dementia.
they keep his handlers keep him going. I mean, something has went horribly wrong.
Yeah, I'm sorry. When you're asking someone to suck your tongue, for those who don't know, evidently, the video is disturbing. But
I watched it. It's beyond disturbing. Beyond.
This idea that the kids he kissed the kid on the lips and then he stuck his tongue out there. The kid and said, "Suck my tongue," and I'm going, I'm confused. I thought that's the Catholic Church's purview.
Well, and the fact that he did it this is my argument about dementia, I guess. He hasn't been known to do these things.
Yeah.
I've never even heard anything in private about him or public. But
because I was saying maybe this is an Indian cultural thing. Maybe
no,
it's something,
no,
maybe it's something
no.
weird that I've never heard of.
No, the Indian kids groups are very upset. No, it's definitely not an Indian cultural thing. And Tibetans will stick their tongue out as sort of a greeting. It's an old, ancient thing, but nobody says "suck my tongue." That's not on the website. Just sticking the tongue out's another thing. And but he did this in public, obvious forum with all these kids and families and everything. My friend and I, and she knows the Dalai Lama pretty good, and we talked tonight, and the only thing we can come up with is that he has, potentially launched into dementia.
Yeah.
To sit there and do that and do it publicly is. I just can't even get my head around it.
Yeah, this should probably be the last public display.
Exactly.
This should probably be the end. But Bob, that's the reason I went to you. You always have the information. I appreciate you taking time for us and sharing.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Look, I saw the video. I thought it was weird, and I had to ask. Take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1930. That was the day Dolores Huerta was born in the mining town of Dawson, New Mexico. When her parents divorced, she moved with her mother to Stockton, California. It was there that Dolores experienced firsthand the discrimination that too often shaped Mexican immigrant children's daily lives. She studied to become a teacher. As a teacher, she was greatly disturbed by the poverty of the farm workers' children that came into her classroom. She decided to leave teaching to organize farm workers. So strong was her conviction, she made this decision to leave her secure job even though she had children of her own and the organizing position was unpaid. She partnered with Cesar Chavez to form the National Farm Workers Association, a predecessor of the United Farm Workers. She served as vice president of the UFW until 1999. She was a key organizer in the successful California grape boycott of the 1960s. That boycott won first-time union recognition for thousands of farm workers. In 1975, she was instrumental in the passage of the California Agricultural Labor Relations Act. In 1988, she was at a rally in San Francisco against the proposed policies of presidential candidate George H.W. Bush. The police violently broke up the protest. Police broke her ribs. They beat her so badly, she had to have her spleen removed. When she won a judgment against the police, she donated her settlement to farm workers. In 2011, she was awarded the National Medal of Freedom for her life of sacrifice for social justice. Several songs, or corridos, have been written in her honor, including this one by popular band Los Lobos.
En Dawson, Nuevo México, el 10 de abril, nació Dolores Huerta. Nadie se lo imaginaba que ella iría a encabezar.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. So here's some news. Look, you got Representative McCall saying, "Hey, it's on the table. We might be going into Taiwan." Also, you've got more Republicans saying that we should be bombing Mexico. So for all those people going, Donald Trump didn't get us in any wars, I think the Republican Party is kind of wanting to move us in that direction. We're gonna bomb Mexico. Yeah, okay. Let's see how that works out. Also, interesting story. As they're cleaning up East Palestine, I guess today this just happened. A truck carrying what they're calling toxic soil evidently crashed on State Route 165 near Waterford Road in Columbiana County in Ohio. I guess, you've got the local fire department, you got the Environmental Protection Agency, all the people at the scene. Don't worry, it's toxic, but it's not a threat. You'll be just fine. That's what they're saying. I don't know. I wonder where they're taking it. See, this is where my mind went. I go, okay, you're going to move the toxic soil from East Palestine because you don't want the people there who've been exposed to it to have to live with it. And where are you going to move that? My first thought was Scranton, because evidently, New Jersey dumps everything in Scranton. Why not Ohio? Yeah. So we'll see where that goes. I'm going to follow that a little bit. The thing I'm looking for this week, and I love the fact that Joe Biden is out touting the economic plan, touting the job creation plans, touting the investments in the country. What I'm going to be spending time looking at this week is how well that's received. All of the noise aside, all of the craziness aside, I look at Biden as a steady hand wanting to move forward. He said that he's probably going to run for re-election. That might happen. I'm still not 100% sure that I think he's going to be the nominee, but I like what he's been doing. I like what the administration's been doing, especially as of late. If we can just figure out how to, maybe solve a couple of problems that are creating more. But ask our Republicans in the House what they're doing to make your lives better. Ask them what legislation they're moving that's going to help bring down the massive inflation. Maybe there's some questions you should be asked. Want to hear your thoughts also. You got any questions, comments, something I said got under your nerves? I really want to hear it. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. As always, appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show.